Hello YouTube and welcome back to Be a Loser. We've covered a lot in this series as well as our other series, and we've taken the stance that the calorie reduction model does not lead to long-term weight loss. In fact, it has an astronomically high failure rate. But we've been mostly focusing on the calories in aspect of this terrible weight loss model. So in this video we're going to focus now on the calories out aspect, which we've discussed some as it relates to energy expenditure, TEE. So everybody strap on your helmets and let's finally look closely at the world view that exercise can help you lose weight. Total energy expenditure is broken into two parts: basal metabolic rate, or BMR, and voluntary expenditure, or exercise. As we know, TEE is notoriously difficult to measure. So instead of bothering to try and calculate it on a daily basis, we just assume that BMR remains constant. We only concern ourselves with exercise. And over time, we make the leap to assuming that TEE and exercise are the same thing. The only little problem here is that we know that BMR can increase or decrease by up to 50%. We've very clearly seen that if you cut calories or undereat, the BMR will lower significantly to compensate. And alternately, if you add in calories or overeat, the BMR will increase to compensate for this. But the exercise proponents, and there are lots of them, believe that if you exercise enough, you can burn off the calories you eat and lose weight. Of course, if this were true, it would mean that as exercise increases, then over time obesity levels would decrease. Well, that certainly sounds reasonable. Now, historically, humans did not exercise. It was basically a non-issue until the 1960s, and obesity was basically a non-issue as well. In 1966, the U.S. Public Health Service began to advocate increased physical activity as a good way to lose weight. And since then, fitness centers and gyms have sprung up everywhere. Everyone started exercising in their spare time. And as we've stated, if exercise was key to losing weight, then obesity levels would decline. Every trainer and doctor I have ever met says exactly that. However, as we began exercising more, we became more obese. There's a direct correlation between exercise and obesity. As we exercise more, obesity increases. Now, we're not saying here that exercise causes obesity, but when we become obese, we're told to increase exercise. And contrary to popular belief, we comply. Is there anyone watching this video that hasn't been told to exercise to lose weight and tried it? Maybe more than once? But if we believe that being inactive or sedentary causes obesity, then being active or exercising should reduce obesity. According to data collected in the US among adults, activity levels have gone up considerably since 2001. But unfortunately, whether or not activity increases or decreases, obesity levels remain virtually the same. Higher activity levels do not reduce obesity. Okay, so what about children? Maybe exercise is more important for reducing childhood obesity. We've definitely heard that recently, haven't we? There was an article published in 2013 in which children ages 3 to 5 had their activity levels measured and compared to their weight. The results were as follows. Regardless of cut points used, accelerometry-based sedentary behavior was not independently associated with BMI Z-score in 2 independent samples of preschool children. What? There is no association between activity and obesity. Okay, so why the hell are we getting so fat? Many people will cite the cars hypothesis, meaning that because primitive societies walked everywhere, they were thin. But because we drive everywhere, we're fat. And that sounds completely reasonable. Sadly, it just isn't true. There's a modern-day hunter-gatherer society known as the Hadza in Tanzania who were discovered by Herman Poncer. This tribe travels anywhere from 15 to 20 miles per day for food. That's a long way to walk. One would assume that being so active would increase the daily energy expenditure of the Hadza more than a typical driving to the office to sit in front of a computer all day worker. Well, Poncer discussed his findings in the New York Times. We found that despite all this physical activity, the number of calories that the Hadza burned per day was indistinguishable from that of typical adults in Europe and the United States. Seriously? This far-traveling tribe doesn't burn any more calories in a day than I do driving myself everywhere all day long? How's that even possible? In a word, compensation. The Hadza who travel such long distances in the day reduce their physical activity when it's not needed. But someone who sits all day at work will often increase their activity at other times. I mean, if you've been walking all day, the last thing you want to do is go run on a treadmill for an hour. But if you've been sitting in front of a computer for the entire day, then maybe a brisk run is just the thing. So I'll say it again. There is no measurable association between obesity and physical activity. Now, bear in mind, I'm not saying that exercise is not good for you. It has many health benefits, and it's important. But one of those benefits is not weight loss. The only reason we think it is because it sounds like it should be. And so we've all bought into the idea. We've been overwhelmed with that idea, but there just simply isn't evidence to support it. Most people think of diet and exercise as an equal proposition in terms of obesity. It's typically considered 50-50 diet and exercise. But we can easily calculate the actual percentages of these two treatments for obesity. Basal energy expenditure, BEE, is estimated to be roughly 12 to 15 calories per pound. In a bed rest state, meaning no activity, caloric needs are estimated to be 1.2 times BEE. So for a 140-pound person, the estimated caloric need would be about 2,100 to 2,500 calories per day. If we now start to walk for 45 minutes per day at roughly 2 miles per hour, a moderate pace, then we would burn about 104 calories. That's 4% of the BEE. 4%. And that's if you exercise every day. Okay, so some people will say that you can exercise harder than that. But even if you walked or ran as hard as you could every day, you might get to what? 8%? Regardless, the majority of calories are used to keep your body working. Heart, lungs, kidneys, liver, brain. So this very clearly demonstrates that diet and exercise are not 50-50 when it comes to obesity. And yet we focus so much on exercise, perhaps even more than we focus on diet. But while exercise is important, we need to focus our attention on the 95% portion of diet. Of course, there's the argument that as a society, we've become much lazier and more sedentary. Most likely, this thinking is due to the digital age. But there was an article that looked at this as well. Physical activity energy expenditure was measured, and values were calculated from the 1980s to the mid-2000s. Bear in mind that the 80s were prior to the obesity epidemic. The results were that, contrary to what we may think, physical activity has actually increased since the 80s. Interesting enough right there, but the authors went a step further. They calculated the predicted energy expenditure for a wild mammal based on body mass and temperature. And the results were, we're no less active than our wild mammal cousins, the cougar, fox, and caribou. And to quote from this article, it is unlikely that decreased expenditure has fueled the obesity epidemic. So there we go. There is no measurable association between obesity and physical activity. But even still, we believe the opposite and are told it by nutritionists and trainers everywhere. Even in some studies where weight was lost due to exercise, the amount was only 1/3 of what was expected. In a fairly recent study, subjects were assigned randomly to either exercise or not exercise over 10 months. Those who did exercise would do 600 calories per session 5 days per week. Those who exercised did lose an extra 10 pounds. But if we calculate the expected weight loss, 600 calories per session times 5 days per week times 10 months divided by 3,600 calories per pound, that's an expected weight loss of roughly 35 pounds. So as we stated, the actual weight loss was only 1/3 of what was expected. We've previously discussed the Women's Health Initiative study as it related to calories in. But another study looked closely at the exercise component of that original study. They followed a group of almost 40,000 women from 1992 to 2004. The women were grouped into 3 groups based on weekly exercise, high, medium, and low levels. The lowest group exercised less than 150 minutes per week, and the highest group exercised 1 hour per day. So you would expect that those in the high group would lose more weight than those not exercising at all over 8 years, right? Well, in the beginning, there's a weight difference between the groups. Those who exercised the most tended to weigh less. But over the next 10 years, there's no change in the amount of weight gained or lost between the 3 groups. The extra weight that you would expect to lose over any 3-year period is just over 1/4 of a pound, or 0.12 kilograms. Restated, if you exercise 1 hour a day, every day for the next 3 years, you will lose 1/4 of a pound more than if you do nothing at all. That is not awesome. I think some people may lose that much every morning in the bathroom. Another study took 100 women and 102 men and randomized them into 2 groups. One group would have no exercise, and another would have 1 hour of aerobic exercise 6 days per week for 1 year. And at the end of that year, the exercise group results were in. Women lost an average of 3 pounds, 1.36 kilograms, and men lost an average of 4 pounds, 1.81 kilograms. That's not particularly awesome either. Well, maybe they just weren't exercising hard enough, right? Okay, well, in a Danish experiment, a group of men and women who were previously sedentary were trained over 18 months to run a marathon. And how much weight did they lose? Well, the men lost 5 pounds, 2.27 kilos, and the women lost 0. Nada, nothing. So of course your trainer will say, dude, it's all lean mass now. Sorry, no. To quote, no change in body composition was observed. The fat was still fat. So as we stated before, compensation is a big reason why exercise is not effective for weight loss. But another aspect of compensation is increased caloric intake in response to exercise. This is one of the things that all the trainers and experts don't tell you. But thankfully, we have a Harvard study to support it. They followed 538 students and examined how different activities caused an energy deficit. And their conclusion? To quote, although physical activity is thought of as an energy deficit, our estimates do not support this hypothesis. For every hour that the kids exercised, they ate an extra 292 calories. That, ladies and gentlemen, is compensation. Exercise is not effective for weight loss. So here we are with study after study showing this very fact, and yet we still are told over and over by experts the exact opposite. Okay, so let's come at this from yet another angle. If exercise was one of the best treatments for obesity, as my friends at the World Health Organization would have you believe, then you would expect that the countries in the world that exercise the most would have the least obesity. Well, a few years ago, a survey of 8 countries and their exercise habits was completed. And the country that exercises the most is the USA. Against a global average of 112 days, Americans were averaging 135 days per year. And for comparison, the Dutch are only exercising 93 days per year. So lazy. So what about obesity? Well, once again, USA wins. And the Dutch obesity rate? Well, it's less than 1/3 of the US. Dr. Andreas Einfeld of DietDoctor.com says it best. Obesity is not caused by a lack of exercise. So many studies, so little time. A 2010 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine included 42 schools with 4,600 students in grades 6 through 8. Half of the schools were told to follow standard health guidelines. Reduce calories, reduce fat, increase grains, increase fruits and vegetables, and exercise more, aka eat less, move more. When the study began, about 50% of the students were overweight or obese, and the follow-up of the study lasted 3 years. And now the results. At the end of the study, the number of overweight or obese students was about 45%. Virtually no change. There is no measurable association between obesity and physical activity. Every study shows this. But we try this approach over and over. It's the definition of insanity. Again, I'm not saying that exercise isn't good for you. No one is saying that. But just don't expect it to get you significant weight loss. As Dr. Fung says, it's like brushing your teeth. Should you brush your teeth? Absolutely. But don't expect any weight loss. The way we focus on exercise compared to how little it affects weight loss is simply ludicrous. If you had an exam tomorrow, and this exam was 95% math and 5% spelling, would you spend 50% or more of your time studying spelling? It's the same with diet, 95% TEE, and exercise, 5% of TEE. And still, we focus at least 50% on exercise. No wonder we keep failing the exam. The problem is that we're not focusing on the cause of obesity. And if we don't know the cause, then how can we ever hope to find the cure? Hopefully this has opened your eyes a bit to the futility of exercise for weight loss, or at least interested you enough to question it. And we'll finish up there. We have many more videos to come in this series, including snacking, a closer look at cortisol, and more of the science of insulin and insulin resistance. So be sure to subscribe to get them. Also, remember to click the bell to enable alerts so that you will know when new videos upload. If the bell is gray, then alerts are enabled. If it's white, then they're not. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Be a Loser Today. And if you like this video or any of our videos, please consider hitting the like button, as it helps the channel get more exposure. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep being a loser.